Well, thank you to Congressman Lee Zeldin. The commercials are the fun parts around here. Sorry about that. We're always chatting all the way through. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciated it, and you guys as well on this historic day after the big summit. Exciting to be here. We are back here tomorrow at noon Eastern. Here now is Harris Faulkner.
And here is what's coming together. President Trump on his way back to Washington, D.C. after that summit that could change the course of history. As we go outnumbered overtime, I'm Harris Faulkner. President Trump is celebrating that historic sit-down with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The two leaders signed an agreement that made a broad commitment for the United States to provide North Korea with, quote, security guarantees in exchange for denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The president says he will halt joint military exercises with South Korea, and that the North had agreed to destroy a major missile testing site. The president also opened the door for Kim Jong-un to visit the White House as he expresses optimism that the dictator is committed to peace. Watch.
Chairman Kim and I just signed a joint statement in which he reaffirmed his unwavering commitment to complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We also agreed to vigorous negotiations to implement the agreement as soon as possible, and he wants to do that. Chairman Kim has told me that North Korea is already destroying a major missile engine testing site. Our eyes are wide open, but peace is always worth the effort.
And of course, the effort back home sometimes involves politics. Democrats say they're not impressed with the president's deal. Watch.
It's worrisome, very worrisome, that this joint statement is so imprecise. What the United States has gained is vague and unverifiable at best. What North Korea has gained, however, is tangible and lasting.
I have to be honest with you, this is the weakest statement I have ever seen come out of any engagement with North Korea.
Very sour there. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts joins us from Singapore. John?
And it should be pointed out right here at the top, Harris, that the Democrats backed some other deals with North Korea that might have looked strong on the surface, but eventually fell apart when North Korea decided to cheat on it. The president's insisting that he is going to hold sanctions and other action over Kim Jong-un's head to make sure that he does comply with the spirit of this agreement. So we've seen some criticism. We've also seen some skepticism of what happened here in Singapore. But from UK Foreign Minister Boris Johnson, just a short time ago, a statement of praise. Johnson saying, quote, "This is an important step towards the stability of a region vital to global economic growth." So some people out there seem to appreciate what the president did. The president pointing out that this is just the beginning. It's a very general document. The president said he didn't really have enough time during the summit itself to get into a lot of specifics. Those details are to be worked out in the weeks and months ahead by a team led by the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and he'll have his first meetings with the North Korean delegation sometime within the next couple of weeks. The president is getting some blowback, though, from a member of his own party on the military front. Lindsey Graham, critical of the president's stated desire to one day, not necessarily now, to remove U.S. troops from South Korea. Listen here.
I want to get our soldiers out. I want to bring our soldiers back home. We have right now 32,000 soldiers in South Korea. And I'd like to be able to bring them back home. But that's not part of the equation right now. At some point, I hope it will be, but not right now.
And you mentioned at the top of this, Harris, that the president does want to end these joint U.S.-South Korean military exercises, saying that they're very provocative and that they're expensive as well. The president believes that if he can get North Korea to denuclearize, if he can sort of bring North Korea, if you will, into the light. And the president had a very interesting video that he played for Kim Jong-un. He had that produced where it showed North Korea coming into the light, and then a question, what is the North Korean leader going to do? But if the president believes that he can do all of that, there may not be a need for at least as many U.S. troops on South Korean soil. We'll see. I mean, we're just in the very first hours after this. There's still a long way to go. Harris?
You're reporting, maybe this will help. We had Congressman Lee Zeldin, who sits on the House Foreign Relations Committee. He's from New York here, John, on Outnumbered, our first hour. And he said also important to note that you can ramp those exercises right back up pretty quickly. Saving the money is very helpful, but it is something that he says that if they needed to put it back on the table, it would not be a difficult thing to do. So I thought I'd pass that along. It was interesting. He had a lot more detail than we have time for now. But just to augment what you were saying, appreciate it. Thank you very much, John Roberts from Singapore.
Thanks, Harris.
Well, for more, let's bring in Michael Fuchs. He served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs under the Obama administration. And Michael, you heard there John Roberts talking about the very strong words now, and I had set it up with strong words from Democrats being very critical of this process. But a reminder from John Roberts that, you know, we've seen North Korea lie and back away from things that they promised under Democrats, and that maybe in these first few hours, Democrats are not really giving this summit a chance.
Well, look, Harris, I, for one, am very happy that the president has decided in recent months to engage in diplomacy with North Korea. This is the only way we're going to actually make any progress. That being said, as you pointed out, with past agreements with North Korea have all fallen apart. And so when it comes to North Korea, we can't trust, we have to verify. And unfortunately, the statement, the agreement that the two leaders came out with just hours ago, I think is very long on trust and very short on details and verification. And that's my concern here, is that the reason that past agreements have fallen apart sometimes is because there's not enough detail. And this statement doesn't have half the detail that those previous ones did.
You know, I want to point this out, too. Seems like we're pointing out a lot to each other here. But I just want to say that in the past, we have put a whole lot on the table with countries that we have dealt with and gotten not a lot back. In this instance, that's not how this is working. I mean, you know, there was a threat just a few days ago of if the president actually walks away from any table or deal, we're going to put on 300 additional sanctions on North Korea. He said just in the last couple of days, this is a one-shot deal, but it may take some time for all of it to come together. So I'm a little confused by what you say, this impatience, if you will, that Democrats are showing, because it's just the beginning.
No, and look, I very much hope that the negotiators on both sides move very quickly to hammer out concrete details of an agreement, because we didn't see very many here. My concern here is that we put the cart before the horse.
Did we?
The President of the United States gave away something that no other leader of the United States has ever given away before, and that was a face-to-face leader with the world's most brutal dictator. This statement that they agreed to a few hours ago was less than the statements that working-level negotiators of two countries have come up with numerous times in the past. And the president welcomed Kim Jong-un onto the world stage and swept aside concerns about all the aggressive activity in his human rights behavior.
That's not true.
That is the concern that I have.
That is not true. And in fact, we know that he has been so keyed in on at least certain elements of human freedom and human lives, because you even had Japan's Shinzo Abe asking our president's help. Can you get my hostages home? Can you help me out with? I mean, this is a president who has spoken up about human freedom and human lives. He was asked about it in the news conference overnight. But again, this is a first conversation. You say he's given away a face-to-face. I want to remind you that when you come out of one of these summits, and you know this from having worked at the State Department, it is very unusual for a communique to be stepped on the way our friends in Canada just stepped on one with President Trump. We're a few hours old from this summit. Let's see what happens, I guess, is what I'm saying to you. But I'm also going to ask you, what is the norm? I mean, how much time was the Clinton presidency given when certain promises were made?
Well, look, you mentioned Canada and the G7, and I think that, again, one of the other disturbing things we saw from President Trump during his meeting with Kim Jong-un during his press conference was actually criticizing the defensive military exercises that we and the South Koreans conduct together as provocative. That is exactly the language that Kim Jong-un and China's leader Xi Jinping use when criticizing our alliances. Defensive, routine, in order to deter and defend American citizens and our interests. But all that aside, I agree that what we need to be doing is making sure that we can hammer out some concrete steps forward here, because unfortunately I didn't see that out of this summit. I very much hope that Secretary Pompeo and the negotiators can actually get some of those specific commitments.
Last quick question for you. You know, Pompeo, our Secretary of State, has gotten accolades from both sides of the political aisle. I'm curious, as a former State Department employee, if you look at him as somebody who has the ability to do what you're asking. Do you believe in him?
Well, look, I am pleased with Secretary Pompeo's willingness so far in his few weeks as Secretary of State to rush headfirst into diplomacy, in particular with North Korea, going to Pyongyang twice. And so I am very much open and hopeful that we will see him rushing head forward and in using the expertise that he has. We saw Ambassador Sung Kim there at his side. I'm very happy about that expertise being there. Michael
Fuchs, formerly of the Obama administration State Department, thank you very much. Let's bring in now Senator James Risch, sits on the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee. He is from Idaho, a Republican who will chair the Senate Working Group on North Korea negotiations along with Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein. Great to have you today. I don't know if you could hear too much of my previous conversation.
Oh, I heard it all right.
Oh, yeah. All right. Let's start there and get your response.
Well, look, you know, the naysayers can't say nay enough. This guy was a poster child for the naysayers. If Barack Obama had accomplished what Donald Trump just accomplished, they'd be calling for the stonemasons to get out to Mount Rushmore and put a fifth head on Mount Rushmore. Wow. This is a historic occasion, and it shouldn't be lost in all the hand-wringing about how they didn't walk out of there and it was over. These things take some time. Look, this is an incredible accomplishment that other people have tried and tried and tried and failed, and we all can agree we have a unique president, and he uniquely got this done.
I think it's interesting that Michael Fuchs and other Democrats that I've talked with just in the last few hours, their comeback for, well, we don't think that the president got enough. They want more of a summit, apparently.
Yeah, well, look, they know better than that. These things don't happen in just a shake. I mean, they take some time. This has been decades in the making. He has two generations behind him, his father and his grandfather, who handled things very differently than how he's handling them. The President of the United States has behind him some people who handled it differently. Look, these two people got in a room. They're strong personalities. Two things need to happen. If they agree on an objective that both can agree on, and if they both work in good faith to meet that objective, this can happen. And it'll be a great thing for America, for the world, for the Korean Peninsula, and everyone else. Everyone in America should be praying for the success of this and talking about positively how we can make this happen.
Senator Risch, there's so many questions I have for you, so I'm just going to tick down. First of all, did we get clear-eyed on a definition for both sides on denuclearization?
Well, obviously, the president and Kim Jong-un discussed that. But more importantly, you have Secretary of State Pompeo dealing with his counterpart on the other side. Plus, we have some people that are very good in the White House on this that have been dealing with this for generations, both the Republican and Democrat administrations. They are sitting at a table talking about exactly what the details mean. And with what's happening, everything so far has been positive. Let's focus on that.
Full verification is what the president says that we will get in this deal, something we certainly didn't get with Iran. So,
have to have.
So how do we get that exactly?
Well, obviously, the devil is in the details always. What we know is what we don't want, and that was with what happened with Iran. They had all kinds of oddball Ouija board kinds of things where they would have to give them notice of 3 weeks, then they'd show up at the gates of a facility. The Iranians would take pictures and bring them out to the gates. Look, that's not good faith. If the parties are acting in good faith, we know how to do verification, and we can get it done. And the president is absolutely committed to see that we do that. We've had a really bad experience with Iran. We know what bad looks like.
Real quickly, before I let you go, the working group, bipartisan Senate working group. Tell me what you can about that.
Well, it's a group that's been around for some time. Dianne Feinstein and I lead that on the two sides. We have on an informal basis talked with the administration because we have a specific role to play in this, an oversight role. Because look, everybody wants to see this as a treaty. If it's going to be a treaty, we need to have hands-on at the beginning and as it goes along, not to interfere, but to assist any way we can and to make it work so we can get a treaty. That'll be good for everybody.
Yeah, and part of that treaty language we know from the president would be to end the Korean War, because we're basically just in a hit pause button right now for many decades. Senator, so good to see you. Always great to have you on the program. Thank you very much,
Love doing your
Senator
show,
Risch.
Harris. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, coming up, we'll dig deeper into President Trump's deal with North Korea and what the potential military consequences could be if Kim Jong-un reneges on the agreement. Retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Michael Waltz will talk the military aspect of it with me coming up. Today is the deadline that House Intelligence Chairman Devin Nunes set for the Justice Department to turn over more documents related to the Russia investigation, freeze its military drills with South Korea as negotiations continue with North Korea. The commander-in-chief also expressing a desire to eventually bring home the thousands of American troops stationed on the Korean peninsula, but admitting we're not quite there yet. Here's some of what the president had to say earlier today in Singapore.
We will be stopping the war games, which will save us a tremendous amount of money, unless and until we see that the future negotiation is not going along like it should. But we'll be saving a tremendous amount of money. Plus, I think it's very provocative.
Lucas Tomlinson is live at the Pentagon with details on this. Lucas, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Harris. The Pentagon calls these joint exercises with South Korea defensive in nature. The term provocative is likely to raise eyebrows here, but President Trump says for now, all U.S. troops in South Korea will remain, despite his calls to suspend the drills.
And I'm doing something that I've wanted to do from the beginning. We stopped playing those war games that cost us a fortune. You know, we're spending a fortune every number of months. We're doing war games with South Korea. And I said, what's this costing? We're flying planes in from Guam and we're bombing empty mountains for practice. And I said, I want to stop that, and I will stop that. And I think it's very provocative, especially, George, since we're getting along.
In a statement, a spokesman for American Forces Korea says, quote, U.S. Forces Korea has received no updated guidance on execution or cessation of training exercises to include this summer-fall scheduled Ilchi Freedom Guardian. The coordination with our South Korean partners, we will continue with our current military posture until we receive updated guidance from the Department of Defense. Now, officials say the U.S. military will continue drills in Japan, where it has twice as many troops. Long-range bombers will continue training flights from Guam. Yesterday, Defense Secretary Mattis said any decision about the potential withdrawal of 28,500 American troops in South Korea would be an issue for President Trump and South Korea's president only. The two leaders spoke hours ago. The next joint exercise comes up in August, and it's more computer-based training. It's the annual spring drills that upset North Korea. They were canceled in the mid-90s when other agreements were made with North Korea. And it's notable each year, Thailand hosts an even larger annual joint training with Asian allies, including South Korea and the United States. Harris.
Lucas, thank you very much. Now let's bring in retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Michael Waltz, a former Green Beret commander. Great to see you. Thank you for being on the program. Look, I want to start with the use of the word provocative when you talk about these exercises that we've been doing for years with South Korea. My earlier guest, Michael Fuchs, was with the State Department under Obama, and he said, well, the president's echoing the dictator's words. Tell me, what words should the president have used, and what's important about all this?
Well, these exercises, are highly symbolic to both sides. The North Koreans have always had issue with them, and the South Koreans find them highly symbolic of the U.S.-South Korean alliance. But there's also a practical side in terms of maintaining readiness, particularly for our allies, and maintaining what the military calls interoperability. That's everything from radars to radios to different types of equipment that both sides put in the field, and making sure in the event of hostilities that they can work together. But Harris, I think really the devil's in the details here, just like this, I think, all of this moving forward, from the verification regime to the military exercises, are we talking about just a big annual exercise and we have a lot of these smaller ones that continue? Does that extend to naval exercises way off the coast? These computer-based simulations, really what does that extend to is still unclear. And that's guidance that the White House will have to work with the Pentagon to then pass down to the field and figure out in consultation with our allies, the South Koreans, the Japanese, the Thai, and everyone else in the region.
What military do we have in place outside of our men and women who are in on the Korean Peninsula? But what military would we pull into port if we needed to? Because the president said, look, I'm going to take this person at his word. I'm paraphrasing the president. But, if 6 months from now, this turns out that we can't trust this guy, then we will go forth with what we said we would do. And the 6 months those were the president's words.
Yeah, no, there's a big difference, and let's draw a distinction between any moving or withdrawing any military from the region and them conducting joint exercises. And again, those exercises are conducted from the very small tactical to the very large and strategic. Where we draw that line is still unclear. I think, Harris, really the focus should be on the president putting on the table a potential withdrawal of U.S. forces, the 28,500 that are on the peninsula, and that being on the table as part of an eventual deal over the horizon is what really folks should be talking about and discussing whether we are willing to do. And we've seen some feedback from Congress on that would have to vote on it probably as part of the treaty. And in that sense, that's the real security guarantee that North Korea is looking for. That's certainly what China wants. They are absolutely a part of this. And I think that is what, is eventually going to move the needle, so to speak, in getting North Korea to fully denuclearize. Excuse me.
So the president talked about military consequences. Let's watch and listen, then I'll get your response.
Okay.
I don't want to talk. Yeah, I know. That's a tough thing to talk about because I don't want to be threatening. I don't want to be threatening. They understood that. And you've seen what was perhaps going to happen. And, Seoul has 28 million people. We think we have big cities. You look at New York where it has 8 million people. We think it's a big city. Seoul has 28 million people. Think of that.
You know what I caught there, Colonel? The president says he doesn't want to be threatening. They already believe we will do what we will do. Yeah. Yes or no?
Absolutely. That's the only reason that we are here is this president knows that the credible use of military force is actually what helps diplomacy. And frankly, if we're candid, I don't think the Chinese or the North Koreans believe that previous presidents, that his predecessors, would go there. So that's why we're there in the first place. But I think this president is a master at dialing up and then dialing back the rhetoric as the situation suits. And what I hope happened in that one-on-one meeting was that he made it very clear to Kim Jong-un that if you play us, if you pull a page out of your father and grandfather's playbook, achieving this program and threatening the United States will mean your regime's destruction, period. And let's figure out a deal somewhere in between.
It's interesting. As I hear you say those words, I hearken back to the news last week or the week before where Kim Jong-un took his 3 top people out and replace them with people he thought had his back more. Because when you're going into an agreement like this or a negotiation, you have to know that no one's going to be backpedaling against you. I mean, that's what the military teaches us. Somebody's got to watch your 6.
Well, that's... No, that's absolutely right. I mean, remember, Kim Jong-un has a domestic audience as well, and that's the North Korean military that's built its entire existence around, justifying its existence with potential war with South Korea and America, and around this nuclear program. There's a reason that his father and grandfather rarely left North Korea because, as the Pakistani president learned, sometimes they don't let you land the plane coming back. Ooh. And so I think he was exactly checking his 6. But that's a signal that maybe there's a strategic shift here afoot, hopefully.
Colonel Waltz, always great to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Harris.
President Trump, again, going after Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau amid the showdown over tariffs that broke out after the G7 summit. Former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer will join me next. And the growing battle between House Intelligence Chairman Devin Nunes and the Justice Department. Nunes is demanding more documents related to the Russia investigation be turned over today. Devin Nunes is setting a deadline of today for the Justice Department to turn over the additional documents he has requested on the alleged FBI informant who met with Trump campaign officials in 2016. In a letter to Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, Nunes is warning failure to turn over the information would be obstruction of a congressional investigation. DOJ officials say Rosenstein, FBI Director Christopher Wray, and Director of National Intel Dan Coats will brief the Gang of Eight again on Thursday. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live for us in Washington. This feels, Catherine, like it really just heated up.
Well, that's right here. It's the back and forth between the Justice Department and Capitol Hill over access to these FBI records about an alleged confidential human source in the Russia case has intensified with a new deadline today to produce the records. As you mentioned, in a letter to the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, the Republican chairman of the House committee, Devin Nunes, said that he was rejecting a Justice Department offer to brief congressional leadership known as the Gang of Eight, calling for the records to be available to committee members as well as designated staff investigators. The letter to the Deputy Attorney General reads in part, quote, "Your continued refusal to permit members of Congress and designated staff to review the requested documents is obstruction of a lawful congressional investigation. Any response falling short of this request will be considered an effort to conceal material information from Congress." Earlier today on Fox, the Republican chairman, Peter King, we heard from him, and he's got an important voice in this because he sits on the House Intelligence Committee.
Why is the Justice Department being so difficult on this? If they have nothing to hide, then come out. Show us what they have. And because there's real questions about whether or not this investigation should have been started of the president or of his campaign, you know, what the premises were, what the predicate was, whether or not there was sufficient evidence, sufficient information to go forward, or was it done improperly? And if they have nothing to conceal, they should come forward and show us what they have.
Senior Justice Department official told Fox News the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, FBI Director Christopher Wray, and the nation's intelligence chief who has oversight for the 16 agencies, the Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats, have offered and look forward to briefing congressional leadership on Thursday, which of course is past this newly imposed House deadline. Harris.
Catherine, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Former Republican Congressman Jason Chaffetz of Utah, a Fox News contributor as well, joins me now. So a deadline and an expectation. What do you make of it?
Well, I expect everybody on the Republican side of the aisle and the Democratic side of the aisle to get behind Devin Nunes. Congress has a responsibility for oversight, a constitutional duty. The oversight function was founded in 1814. The Department of Justice was founded in 1870. Congress appropriates the money. Congress authorized the Department of Justice, and there is no reason why people with properly duly issued security clearances, duly elected members of Congress should not be able to see the actual documents, not another briefing. That doesn't cut it.
So last hour, Congressman Lee Zeldin was on with me. He says we need Jason Chaffetz back. You can smile at that, but that also indicates that this fight is really hard. How hard is it?
Look, there's a reason why Rod Rosenstein doesn't want the American people and the duly elected representatives to see this document. But that's precisely why this country does the oversight. That's why you go in and look. They don't want to see every single document, but when you have a suspicion, then you need to go in there and see it. That's what separates the United States of America. We are open. We are transparent. We do look at these things. But Rod Rosenstein, in a Republican administration, I got to admit, has been the biggest obstacle to actually providing that openness, that transparency, and that accountability. The deep state just does not want it.
Okay, I hear you use that term deep state. Critics have said, well, no, this is not deep state. This is a situation where a man is doing his job. And you say?
No, absolutely not. No. And where are the Democrats on this, by the way? They're going to want to see some Trump documents, but because this is the Obama administration, they're absolutely nowhere on this stuff. They need to come clean and support. Every member of leadership, Paul Ryan, Kevin McCarthy, Steve Scalise, all the committee chairmen, every member of Congress ought to be standing behind Devin Nunes. It's very important work, and it's the only way we have true checks and balances on this government.
And if Rod Rosenstein does not capitulate to this new deadline, what happens?
Well, Congress has got to show some guts. They ought to yank them up there. They ought to hold them in contempt of Congress, and then they ought to follow through with it. They ought to demand that the Department of Justice, this is the irony, this is the tough part, this is what needs to change. The only way to enforce a contempt of Congress or a duly issued subpoena is to go to the Department of Justice. And so until Congress gets a backbone in the House, the Senate, the appropriators, the leadership, until they actually stand unified, it isn't going to change. They're going to just stonewall and hide these documents, which is fundamentally at the core of this nation, and who we are as a nation is just wrong.
Wow, I see why Zeldin wants you back. You call everybody out on this. Real quickly before I let you go, you mentioned the Democrats and their role in all of this, and you say that that's critical too.
Shame on the Democrats for not standing up and saying, in principle, we want to see these documents. Just because it happened in the Obama administration is no excuse for them to stand on the sidelines and just see what happens. Because when it comes to the purity of then wanting to see Trump-related documents, I guarantee you they're going to be pounding their fists, they're going to be yelling and screaming. But some of us, no matter who's in office, think that this is the way that our government operates. Congress gets to see these materials.
Jason Chaffetz, not going back to Congress as far as we know. He's with Fox News now, and we appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Harris.
Well, President Trump is going after Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau again, saying his comments at the G7 were a mistake that will cost him a lot of money. We'll talk with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau over comments he made in a news conference about President Trump's tariff threats after the president left the G7 summit. Watch.
I think that Justin probably didn't know that Air Force One has about 20 televisions. And I see the television, and he's giving a news conference about how he will not be pushed around by the United States. And I say, push him around. We just shook hands. It was very friendly. Look, countries cannot continue to take advantage of us on trade. He assumed I was in an airplane and I wasn't watching. He learned that's going to cost a lot of money for the people of Canada.
Sean Spicer, former press secretary for President Trump, joins me now. I see that beaming smile on your face. I have to think that's because you're not surprised about the president's words, but were you surprised to see a Canadian prime minister sign a communique, agree to something, and come after the president like that?
Well, I think, look, in light of North Korea, it's pretty obvious that President Trump's made it clear that relationships matter. How he gets along with somebody, his ability to read them, to develop friendship and trust with them, helps him get better deals, move things along. In this particular case, I think he's developed a very close and trusting relationship with the Prime Minister in Canada and felt betrayed by that. That here is the Prime Minister who had spent time with him discussing the issues that were important on the agenda there at the G7 and had never really, according to President Trump, brought this concern up with him. Then once the president left the summit, he then went out and did a press conference sort of hitting at the president and the policies when he wouldn't bring it up to his face. That's not something that President Trump's going to take lightly. As I mentioned, relationships matter to him and trust matters to him. And so to see that undermined is something that I don't think he will forget anytime soon.
So, Sean, how does this work? I mean, does the White House comms department sit down, and everybody kind of discusses what the flowback will be? Or not, because I mean, this was, when you look at the leverage that the United States has, 20% for Canada's GDP exports to us, that's their economy. 1% for what they're sending to us affects our economy. I mean, clearly, when the president says it's going to cost them money, he means it.
Well, market access to the U.S. economy is what most other countries in the world seek to gain. I think Canada and the United States have a very robust back and forth agreement. But as you correctly point out, our market is much bigger and important to their economy than theirs is to ours. So these disputes, are important to our economic well-being, but more so to Canada's. And I think the Prime Minister has probably learned that that mistake may have cost their marketplace, their market access, and ultimately their economy by doing it in that manner.
So this has gone on for days. Again, does the comms department get together now at the White House, because you were there, as the former press secretary, and you craft something about Canada, or do we just not? What happens next?
Well, I think I've learned, and most people have learned, that the president's the lead communicator when it comes to this. So you are following suit. You're seeking his guidance, trying to figure out how far he wants to push this, how far he wants to echo it. I mean, he may want to take the ball and carry it himself. In this case, he may want the team to back him up on it. But it's going to be his decision how he wants this strategy crafted in terms of Canada, what the frequency is, what the tone and tenure is. But we'll continue to see. But your job at this point, if you're in the White House, is to get a read on what the president wants to do. I think based on the success that he just had in Korea and the world and global implications that decision had, I would assume that the team is more focused on trying to make sure that success is the paramount discussion right now.
Yeah, I love to kind of get that behind the scenes from you. So thank you very much. Always great to see you, Sean Spicer. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks.
President Trump pointing to his tough rhetoric as the reason North Korea came to the table at this unprecedented summit. The president.
Everyone, I'm Dana Perino. Did the Chinese Foreign Ministry announce that President Trump would suspend the U.S. war games in South Korea before Trump even made the announcement this morning? We'll tell you about that report. Plus, now that the big Singapore summit is over, what are the next steps for the military and State Department? I've got some great guests who will discuss that. And there are 5 primaries today, primaries in 5 states. We're going to break those down for you on the Daily Briefing.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
Now, remember what Colonel Waltz told me a few minutes ago, that North Korea believes the president when he says that the military would get engaged. The president is pointing to that tough rhetoric as the catalyst that brought North Korea to the negotiating table for the historic summit. He says without it, they never would have gotten this far since sanctions alone were not working. The president also criticized his predecessor's decision not to respond to the North's threats. Watch.
Other administrations, I don't want to get specific on that, but they had a policy of silence. If they said something very bad, very threatening and horrible, just don't answer. That's not the answer. That's not what you have to do. So I think the rhetoric, I hated to do it. Sometimes I felt foolish doing it, but we had no choice.
I like some power in my power panel. Dan Henninger, Wall Street Journal Deputy Editorial Page Editor. Judy Miller, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter and author, both Fox News contributors. Can I start with something that's a little different? So we look at President Trump and the criticism that he's getting today from some Democrats thinking he didn't go far enough. I don't know, maybe they wanted a 9-hour summit. But you look at that, and I look at the criticism, too, that President Barack Obama got when he went to Cuba, but it wasn't quite the same. And he was doing the wave in that communist nation. And you say?
I say that there are 2 standards. What President Obama did that was questionable or not effective usually got a pass from a lot of mainstream media reporters. And President Trump, because he's chosen to go to war with the media, is not getting a pass, will not get a pass. And we're seeing that to some extent in the reaction to the summit.
It's very early in these hours. And
very early.
I had a Democrat on earlier who served with the State Department under Barack Obama, president, and he said, you know, it is early, but there are still huge expectations that Democrats have.
Yeah, well, most of the commentary I've seen, Harris, have been hopeful on this. And the president is correct that the previous models deployed by presidents from Clinton onward, Bush, Obama, with North Korea, simply did not work. It did not produce
And that's
results.
bipartisan, what you just mentioned.
That's bipartisan. And so the president is trying a new approach. There aren't too many alternatives. And I think he understated the value of the sanctions, which he had the UN impose in September of 2017. After North Korea's 6th nuclear test, their largest test, that precipitated some of that rhetoric by the president. But I think those sanctions were squeezing and hurting North Korea.
Well, and we have an indication that that is so, too, because the latest rhetoric from the president, although you might not call it rhetoric, you might just call it a promise, he said, look, if he ends up walking away from the deal at any point, it's 300 more sanctions on North Korea. Interesting number.
That's a lot. That's a lot. And I agree with Dan. I mean, I really think maximum pressure worked. It was a welcome change from our previous strategy, but it wasn't really maximum. We have yet to see what maximum economic pressure can do, because some Korea analysts have said again and again, until the United States is prepared to go after China, we won't actually know whether or not Kim is feeling economic pressure. But I'm not sure that offering Kim condos, the prospects of condos in Pyongyang, is going to bring him around. I do think that a lot of the credit, by the way, Harris, should go to President Moon Jae-in. It wasn't just the harsh rhetoric and then the turnaround. It was that President Moon Jae-in of South Korea was playing Mr. Nice Guy to Mr. Trump's no more Mr. Nice Guy.
Yeah, because they had a handshake early on, too, which was also considered rather historic.
Right.
You know, Dan, as you look at this total situation and a timeline that might go forth, what do you see based on other summits that you have covered and things that you have seen come together and fall apart?
Well, Harris, I think you've put your finger on the biggest issue here, timeline. What makes this situation different from past is that we know that North Korea is getting to the point where they may be able to attach a nuclear warhead to an ICBM. Mike Pompeo, when he was CIA director, said maybe a handful of months. So time is short. The clock is ticking here. We don't have an indefinite amount of time to negotiate with North Korea. I think the administration is going to have to be showing some bigger results, more positive results, and showing them very quickly.
All right. Real quick, last thought.
Right now, we just have vague declarations of intent. I think the proof is in the pudding. We're going to see whether or not North Korea very quickly is willing to have verifiable, a word we didn't see in that communique.
Not in the communique, but the president said full verifiable. He knows that that's kind of the split with what we saw.